Matt Orvis, thank you so much for meeting with us this afternoon. I'd like you to open up by maybe sharing a little bit about yourself and how you came to be involved in space.
Yeah, thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be here. Great to have our relationship pay off, and I hit the big leagues being on a podcast here. So,
Yeah.
so my name is Matt Orvis. I work with NearSpace Launch. Been working with them for I think 6 years now, doing everything from system design and layout of satellites to proposal writing to data analysis, electrical engineering, all the way through, writing publications on those papers and mission management and such.
What is NearSpace Launch like? I know that you have a lot of different hats that you wear, but if you're describing what NearSpace Launch's role is in the industry in a nutshell, what do they do?
There's a couple different primary roles. I say one of the main things we do is we develop space comm subsystems for different groups. The NSL has a couple different primary roles. I'd say one of the big ones right now is providing space comms to larger vehicles. So we'll provide comm suites to launch vehicles and deployment vehicles for them to downlink telemetry to the rockets and stuff like that, and second stage boosters and the spaceflight Sherpas. And we also develop a full spacecraft platform as well that we can integrate payloads onto. So a research group will come to us with a particular sensor they want to fly, and we will develop and build a satellite that can host that sensor, that can power it, run it, collect data from it, and then transmit that data to ground.
Awesome. So how long has NSL been in existence, and how did you first get started with NearSpace Launch?
NSL, I think, officially started in 2015, and that's when I officially became involved as well. Me and one of the founders, Hank Voss, he was a professor of mine in my undergrad at Taylor University, and we built 2 CubeSats in my undergrad together. And so we already had a long working relationship. And then after I got my master's, I joined on with him as his first employee. And so it's been growing and doing cool stuff ever since then.
It's outstanding. So I would imagine the first time I met you was 2016 at the SmallSat conference.
Mm-hmm.
You had not even been with the company for a year at that time. Is that right?
No, I was fresh off the printing press right there.
That's outstanding.
Well, so when it comes to your work that you do with Kevin or small, little CubeSat teams or larger ones for that, what role do you play in that? So I know, again, many hats, but with specifically in the case of Kevin and maybe the CubeSat development team.
With the CubeSat development team, I have much more technical involvement. So I'll be doing a lot of system design and layout of the actual satellites to provide a platform that is actually going to make sense for their particular payload. And so it'll be configuring different components that we have, or sourcing newer components that maybe that provide a different requirement that can be met. And then I'll generally be the primary point of contact from a mission management standpoint. So coordinating with the clients, which in some cases was Kevin, and the launch providers, and making sure that licensing goes well and all the regulatory hurdles are met. And so being the vendor perspective on all of those meetings.
So you get to interact with some of the other companies that they need to have on board in order to go from start in the build to launch. Is that correct?
Right. So I'll interact with the launch providers, with people like Spaceflight and NanoRax. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the launch vehicles themselves, like SpaceX and Northrop Grumman, to meet their range safety concerns. We'll be on design reviews with NASA for their own safety reviews. And then also coordinate, FCC licensing and those type of
things. I think you guys introduced us to Mike Miller, who is a really nice guy. We had interviewed him earlier. Yeah, you guys are, I can't say enough positive about you. For people on our podcast not watching the video version of this, I actually am wearing an NSL shirt now that I think
he's our brand ambassador.
That's right. I think I got it at a small sat conference. So what I like most about NearSpace Launch is that when I first met you, you had like, it seemed like 15, maybe 18 payloads on orbit. And now you have what? Are you over 500 or 600?
Over 600 now.
That's outstanding. And I know you have such a reliable radio. That's what we always hear, is that the NSL radios will always turn on when you get to orbit. So that's
Yeah,
always
100% success so far that has been verified. So
I was
Yeah.
pulling up the bio because I couldn't remember for the life of me about your background, and I wanted to ask a question on your degree. So I see it here. So physics, right? So you have
Yeah.
a master's and a bachelor's in physics. So when you were
Mhm.
first deciding to go into that field, what was it about physics in general that drew you there?
I was always kind of a physics and science junkie. I think I really turned me on to it in high school when I had a couple of really good teachers. But I think when I was like 7 years old, I wrote a paper on how when I grew up, I was going to be an aerospace engineer.
awesome.
So it's always been in my blood, you know.
Yeah.
Satellites kind of became a thing for me in college, though, when I got involved in that CubeSat project. That was when, you know, it really got deeply involved with space and spacecraft
Right.
and that stuff.
Were you actually a part of like Hank's first CubeSat that he launched? Was it I want to call it TSAT, but is that the right name? And
Yep,
were you
yep, I
on
was on
that as
TSAT.
an undergrad?
Yeah, yep, I was designing a electric field sensor for that satellite, doing some orbital decay simulations and stuff.
You know, I think some of our listeners who are students who've been working on satellites would be fascinated to hear maybe some of the differences. So what was it like for you as, you know, a young man kind of working for the first time on that? And what were some of the things that maybe we could compare how it was then versus how the experiences that they would have?
Well, I imagine it would be, I don't think CubeSats have changed that much in in 6 years. But I know that for me, I mean, the first satellite I worked on, everything was just deeply overwhelming. and it just kind of felt like I just basically had to have my hand held through the whole thing, or else I would have no concept of what they were even talking about, you know. But after, you know, getting pushed out in the deep end a few times and realizing I actually had a better grasp of things than I thought I did, um, and spending countless nights up till 2 a.m. in science labs and stuff, you know, eventually get the hang of it, and you understand, you know, at least the basics of what's going on. I still consider myself pretty much a rookie in this whole thing. I mean, 6 years is a lot for someone coming out of college, but in the scheme of being a, you know, space systems engineer, I'm still very new to this whole thing, you know. So still for me, it's every day trying to glean as much information and learn and add value to my skill sets and stuff.
That's yes. And for our listeners, I have to tell you, I have leaned on Matt repeatedly, frequently over the years, because he is you know, to us, he is the subject matter expert. And I know you've been gracious with your time, and we hired you to do some workshops for us. And we had when COVID hit, you did, I want to say, about 6 hours of videos where we just, the kids, you did subsystems breakdowns for the kids. It was outstanding content, and I really appreciate it. Little pivot here. Is it true you were a college football player?
I played football for the Air Force Academy, and then I played football for Taylor University.
Is it true you were a really good football player?
I did win, I think first team all conference for tight end. Yeah.
That's not bad. That's not bad. So what kept you from the NFL? Is it just the love of physics that kept you from the NFL?
It was the realization that with my skill sets, it would have had to consume my entire life to make it, and I wanted to spend my life doing other things than just play football all day.
It's outstanding though. You got to, you know, a lot of kids play football at young ages and then in high school, but very few make it to college, and you got to be a college athlete. So that's outstanding.
Yeah, it was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about the culture of CubeSats today. And I know that, for instance, NASA, their RFP, their request this year, they said there's 8 states we haven't flown, they get priority. But that's just one little NASA program. From your vantage point, being a real world space systems engineer working on real hardware day and night, what do you see the direction of CubeSats, the smaller ones and the little bit larger ones, the 3, 6, 12s in constellations and whatnot?
Yeah, well, what's cool is up until just a couple years ago, or it's kind of been a general trend, is CubeSats are very much looked down on in the space industry as kind of these little toy satellites, educational satellites, little playthings for students to do things on. But as technology has progressed and as mindsets have shifted, I mean, it's just the trend of technology to get smaller and smaller, and to have those sizes be far more capable. And CubeSats now are, a very booming part of the space industry and are contributing actual science and technical merit to things. We've got, CubeSats going around Mars to check things out and to pave the way for some of the larger satellites, and testing out lots of really critical technology pieces, and performing real amazing science experiments as well. They're not just, a test bed for students to cut their teeth on. They're really valuable and contributing to what we're doing nowadays in space.
Does that mean that that there are other folks besides university students or students who are actually using them now?
Quite a few, yeah. There's lots of commercial groups that are developing sensors that can either be tested on a CubeSat or flown for their primary mission on CubeSats, doing, Earth to space measurements, doing, remote sensing of the Earth, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Is it Planet that is doing the flocks of these 3U CubeSats which image the Earth? And I believe they have like a couple of hundred, right? They have a really large constellation.
Yeah, I think they've got a couple hundred. Yeah, and they're doing imaging of the Earth and then providing those images to different groups.
That's outstanding. So you've been at NSL. I guess you're pretty happy there. You were employee number 1, and you're several hundred satellites later. You're still still there. What do you see as the future for NearSpace Launch? Do you have any exciting products or programs you want to share with us? And what's your company up to these days?
Yeah, well, I'd say, one of the new areas that we're moving into is one that we've talked to you about, Kevin, is what we're calling this TROOP program, or the Train Rapid On-Orbit Payload, which is basically combining a CubeSat with these launch vehicle, communication suites, and making them kind of the same thing. And so we'll bolt onto the outside of a second stage booster or a Sherpa deployment vehicle, and in exchange for us providing telemetry and comm access for the Sherpa vehicle, we will be allowed to host payloads on that. And so for roughly 1/10 the cost of what it would normally take to fly a CubeSat, we're able to have the same amount and capability for a payload to get hosted in that. And it's, right now it's a 3-month cadence, which is kind of an unheard of turnaround time for satellites. Of every 3 months is kind of unheard of to be able to, in that time span, lock in, committing to a launch and then launching. Normally these are several year programs. So there's a lot of companies right now that are really interested in getting rapid turnaround times and flight heritage for these new systems that they have, because there's a lot of groups that have really cool systems that have been developed that are for all intents and purposes commercially viable, but without flight heritage there's not that much interest in them. And so it's a way for those groups to get really quick flight heritage and start making these things more appealing to the broader community.
What is the length of the mission for these proposed troop payloads? Well, how long can someone validate some hardware? What's the mission lifetime if somebody purchases one of these troop rides with you?
Normally 5 to 8 years, but there's going to be some rides that are up to 20-25 year lifetime period.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's outstanding. I don't know. I know you there were some pictures way back in the day of you in a clean room busting your tail on thin sats. Are thin sats still part of your product line? And do you want to talk a little bit about the thin sat and the opportunities there?
Yeah, I actually just spent a couple of weeks locked down building CubeSats about 2 months ago for an upcoming launch of those. And so it's not going to be as a huge a constellation as we did before with 60 or 30 units, but it'll be a group of, I think, 6 of them this time.
Okay, and that's equivalent to about a 1U CubeSat, right?
That is equivalent to a 1U, so it's flying 6 of these, thin sats as a 1U, and then there's 2 other 1Us that we're flying in tandem with that. So it's a full 3U that's been sliced up into 8 satellites, basically.
Wow.
Are thin sats able to do the same kinds of research or payloads that a CubeSat would do, a regular?
There's definite restrictions, mostly on the volume and the power that can be provided to a payload. But for a lot of these things, like if your payload is a PC board that's this big, well, you don't need even a 1U CubeSat to support that. And so, it's basically finding that lowest common denominator of what's needed for a payload to successfully operate and collect data in space.
Excellent.
And there's a lot of cases where just a slice of toast is basically all the size that's needed.
So Matt, for our students, I know you've been on publications. Not only are you really an engineer, a physicist, I would call a scientist, but you're definitely applied physics and engineering. Could you speak a little bit about your background and how important it is that you be really solid in your communications, both written and oral? Because I literally, it was conversations with you 6 years ago, almost 6 years ago, that led to the first middle school kids getting involved with CubeSats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to overestimate the value of communication skills, even in a field that's as hard and number driven as engineering. If there's lots of super competent engineers out there, but that are doing amazing things, but without the ability to relay that to people in a way that is intuitive and helps them to understand, it's really difficult for projects to move well, and for there to be a passing of tasks from one group to the other and achieving of deadlines and stuff, just because people are on different pages. And even outside of that technical application of communication, just being able to relate to people in a way that is personable and write emails in a way that comes across with a friendly demeanor. I've seen it be such a blessing in a lot of different situations that could have ended in groups kind of going their own way because of differences, but instead we're able to find some common ground and compromise on a few things, just because on a personal level we still had a connection.
Right. I got very few emails over the years from Hank Boss and Jeff Daly. They're the founders of NearSpace Launch. But I would imagine early on in the company's life, you were a lot of the face of NSL in the trenches with the potential customers and the customers. Is that a fair statement for the early years when you were at NSL?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to, at least, and probably mischaracterizing almost everything we did. But at least was a friendly face that knew some of the jargon.
Yeah. What's the most enjoyable conference or activity? What, in your experience with your satellites, what was your happy place, or a couple of memories that really stick out in your work with satellites?
Conferences, small sat is the place to be. I mean, that's like Disneyland for a satellite engineer. As far as the actual work, I think my happy place is in the assembly and integration of the hardware. So getting to take what has at times been years of working with CAD and electrical schematics and PowerPoint presentations, and finally getting all the hardware, the PC boards, the frames and the nuts and bolts, and getting to put them all together and test electrical connections, and actually see it come to life and start transmitting data and doing what it's supposed to do, that's where I really get excited.
Awesome.
Well, as we are about to the end of our time together today, we always kind of close with these words of wisdom that you might have. So for our listeners who might be thinking, a lot of times they just think about engineering, but your job seems to be a lot more than that. You get to be doing all kinds of hat wearing. What would you say to somebody who's just heading off to college about being involved in something like what you do?
It's a blast. Don't get discouraged by things being challenging and not understanding any of the words people are even using. If you're willing to stick it out and have some passion and some perseverance, I guarantee you'll do really well. You'll learn it all, and you'll be able to contribute in a meaningful way.
Well, awesome.
Appreciate that.
Well, for our folks here, Matt Orvis has been the best friend that the Wolf Pack has ever had. I mean, honestly, and we're really glad to know you. I just want to thank you for taking a few minutes to be with us today. And we hope maybe we can have you back sometime down the road and talk a little bit more.
And what website for our listeners, if they wanted to learn more about NearSpace Launch, if you want to plug the website, this is a good time to do it.
Very complicated, NearSpaceLaunch.com.
Excellent. One word.
Yep, all one word.
Awesome.
And I really appreciate you guys on a personal level, and I know our companies have done a lot of work, and I know we'll continue to, but you guys are very near and dear to our hearts, and I know we share a lot of the same DNA of willingness to innovate and try some crazy stuff, and I think we've made a good team over the years in that.
Well, thanks a lot, Matt, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
All right, great talking to you guys.